Okay, hello everybody, and thank you for joining me. Hopefully, I have some new people here joining me live. I just getting used to the chat a little bit, right? So I'm going to keep trying to go and look at the chat, but right now, my biggest objective is to get here on time for you. You can see I have scrolling across the bottom there both my website and my email address. One of the things with my email address right now is I'm putting that out there for you so that you can email me questions, because I have got a new addition to my website, and you can find that on my website, www.healthymindbodyspirit.net. I have got a new edition there, and the new edition is today's question. And then keep looking for those. Keep going to my website and keep looking for that new edition. It is underneath the About button. So if you see the About button there, and there you can also make an appointment and see my schedule for appointments as well. So check that out. Today's question, and somebody's asking me. These are questions that are coming from you. And so what I'd like you to do is, if you have a question, you can join me live, of course. But also you can email me at Dr. Feravich at healthymindbodyspirit.net. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what we're going to be talking about for this episode. So, of course, you know that this is my series on love and sex in the 21st century. This is episode number 4, and this is part 2. What is love, and what are the differences today? So one of the things that I'm going to be doing today for you is I'm going to be taking a look at some really interesting questions that help us better understand what is the most healthy love. Because we've already talked about how easy it is for us to fall in love. So easy, but not always easy to find the right partner. And so, love can be really painful, of course. So since it can be very painful, we want to make sure that we are really engaging in relationships that build individuals up, that build the other person up, and builds me up. And we're going to talk about some of those strategies that we can use that actually help us determine better what is real love. Okay, so again, I'm Dr. Annette Feravich from Healthy Mind, Body, Spirit. You can find me on the internet at www.healthymindbodyspirit.net. I'm here in Michigan, in the metropolitan Detroit area. It's a rainy day today, and so I am videotaping from inside, and thank you again for joining me. All right, so some of the things I want to talk to you about is, first of all, let's look at the agenda that we have. I'm going to start putting a little agenda for you, and that agenda is going to help us stay on track. And also, this will help you just move along just a little bit in the video as you go along. So you might see something in the agenda that really interests you. So you can slide down the video a little bit, and slide along and hurry the process up. One of the things I want to make you aware of is that there's a lot of complex information that I try and give you. So if you do slide the video along a little bit, fast forward it a little bit, you might be missing some of the intricate details that I try and give you, especially when we're talking about love, because there is so much complexity to the subject, and actually not as much research on the topic as we would like. So for today's agenda, I talked to you about answering your questions, so make sure that you visit me at www.healthymindbodyspirit.net, where you will see my new question of the day. And today you can see right there what the question is for today and how I answer that, okay? So if you're interested, go to my website and you can find that question of the day. All right? Also, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the things that I have been seeing going on in science lately. And One of the things that I noticed was that they had taken down one of my YouTube videos. And if you watched my video last week, you will see that I make a comment on this. And it's a little bit bothersome to me. And so here I've got the video that they took down. And so this is a video that they actually did continue to have a link for me in these top documentaries films. This documentary film is called The Crisis in Science. And this video is put out there by the Corbett Report. And this is one of the things that actually has periodically has been removed from the internet. And what it does is it criticizes science in certain ways and talks about some of the science out there that has been fabricated. And so I would like you to kind of use your own judgment about some of these things. It's a hot topic right now about what kind of rights that we have relative to the internet. So I just want you to be aware of those things. Let's move along. About science. Now, the third thing I wanted to talk about today was what makes us happy. Now, I know this is a love topic, and so it's kind of, well, why am I talking about happiness if I'm supposed to be talking about love? And we're going to talk about the reasons why. Much of our science actually has more to do with happiness than it does love, okay? And one of the reasons why is because happiness actually is a whole lot easier, as we've talked about in the past, to study than love is. And so happiness is not the same thing as love, but we're going to do a couple Q&A things with you today, and we're going to narrow in on some of the differences between happiness and love. Because really, what good is love if it's not really fulfilling some kind of, inner need for happiness, right? Now, I'll tell you that in psychological terms, yes, we do study happiness, but in positive psychology terms, happiness is not the end all and be all. We talk more about a term that we call well-being. And this well-being has more to do with our fitness, and not just physical fitness, although that plays a part, but mental fitness as well. And the reason why this mental fitness is important is because we can't engage in healthy relationships or healthy love, right, without this mental fitness. And the mental fitness, I know through health psychology, equates to physical fitness. It's one of the reasons why I concentrate on all three areas of fitness. I'm taking a class right now which talks a little bit more about that kind of fitness, and I'm going to share that with you a little bit later on, not in this episode, but a little bit later on. But in this episode, as far as fitness goes and as far as love goes, we are going to talk just a little bit more from a perspective of happiness. Okay? All right. So that's why we're going to talk about what makes us happy. Then the next thing is, can I love someone if I don't love myself? That's actually something that we're going to be talking about coming up. But we want to sort of tease you on that to get you to think about that. All right. And then the last thing that we're going to be talking about is what are purposeful behaviors that lead to love. All right, so let's go ahead and we're going to get started then. We talked a little bit about the science, and now what I want you to kind of do is get a little bit prepared for maybe pen and pencil, something like that, because I want to prepare you for a little bit of a quiz that we're going to end up taking. Okay? Now, this is what I wanted you to have a piece of paper for. I'm going to hold this up there or leave this up there for a little bit, but as you can see, this is a list of mate preferences. What you're doing is you are rating each one of those preferences, and you can see there how they are being rated. And so indispensable, is that trait? Do you believe indispensable? Put a 3 there by it. Do you believe that trait is important but not indispensable? For 1 point, it's desirable but not important, and 0, it's irrelevant. All right, so take a look at those mate preferences, and we're going to talk more about those next week. Remember, one of the things that we said was that we want to have an idea of what is most important to us, right? Remember, we were talking about this hierarchy with love being at the top of the hierarchy, one of the most important desires that we have. All right, so our goal right now for our series is to start at the top, and then what we're going to do is we're going to work our way down to ideas that contain less love, right? So as we move to dating and as we move to sort of the biological needs that we have for a mate. So to help us move in that direction, what I would really like you to do is take a look at this mate preferences and then try and rate those according to the scale that you see listed there. Okay. When we're talking about love, these are actually some of the components we've already talked about. The building blocks start with infant attachment. And we already talked about the importance of infant attachment and the importance of a secure attachment in infancy. The second building block for flourishing relationships are adult attachments, right? And we talked about how if we don't have a good solid foundation for our infant attachment, it's going to be difficult for us to demonstrate adult attachment. And then as we have these mental representations of adult attachment, when those mental representations are healthy mental representations, then what that does is it leads to a healthy idea of what love is, right? Okay, and then as we move up, if and only if we have healthy ideas of love. So we've refined our mental representations. That is, if we've had insecure attachments, we've refined those mental representations of insecure attachments in ways that provide us. In fact, I usually don't call it just love, I call it mature love, right? And what that does is it helps get us to flourishing relationships. And so that's where we're moving towards. We're moving towards those flourishing relationships. And then we can see there on the side, when we have flourishing relationships, is when we are willing to put in purposeful behaviors. And the person that we're interacting with, is it our mother? Is it another adult? Is it in mature ways, right? So these purposeful behaviors then lead to those flourishing relationships, which is our ultimate goal for this series, flourishing relationships, right? Now, last time we talked about Erikson's psychosocial theories of behavior. And I just want to do a little reminder of the importance of these psychosocial behaviors. And that is, if you recall, each one of these are a series of stages. And at each stage, we have an optimal age range for when we accomplish that stage. We have an optimal relationship at each one of those stages. And we have a virtue that is an outcome of each one of those stages. So one of the most important things of this psychosocial theory to me was the idea that we are able to better determine where a traumatic event occurred. So when we see behavior related to a teenager, a 5-year-old, right, a 25-year-old, when somebody's 60, right, we are better able to determine when that traumatic event or the event actually that begins to change your thinking in ways that are not beneficial to building relationships. That's what we're looking for. When did your thinking begin to become biased in ways that are unhealthy? That's what we really want to know. All right, and that's what we really want to introspect on. That's what you would want to introspect on. There are some really good things for you to take a look at. If you take a look at my website, And one of the things that I have out there is some really in-depth information about my therapy and how my therapy, transformational therapy, actually gets to what those events are that detoured you. And then it doesn't take a whole lot of time actually to get back online once we find out what those events are. Okay? All right. Now, this is one of the things that we have not talked about, but it's very important. I would like you to think about getting more information on this outside of these videos that I have, and that's on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is a really interesting theory, and many students are aware of this theory. You usually hear about this theory when you take Psych 101. It's a wonderful theory, and what I did there was I blew out the section of this theory that we have been focusing on. What this hierarchy is, it's a hierarchy of our needs, starting with our most basic needs, physiological needs, and then moving up to safety needs, and then where we're at love and belonging. Then we talk about esteem needs, and then self-actualization. Actually, we don't talk about it. This is what Maslow talks about. But what the importance of this hierarchy of needs is, which we discussed in episode number 2, is that if we don't have these needs fulfilled, the reality is actually that we will die. Now, this is really some interesting theoretical stuff that we're talking about. And I asked you to take a look at Harry Harlow's videos as well. What Harry Harlow did was he did experiments in order to demonstrate that this is a basic biological need. And I talked about that in episode number 2. He did those with rhesus monkeys, if you recall. And so when we're taking a look at this as a need, we want to take a look at the biological basis for that need, as well as the emotional or spiritual or soulful need that we have to fulfill. Because it's not simply just our biology that moves us along in positive ways through life. It's not just our biology, it is also our spirit, right? Our goals, our need for something bigger than just having our biologies fulfilled. All right? And this shows you also the importance then of what we're trying to talk about. We're not simply talking about how can we get together. That's the easy part, right, with somebody else. The hard part is how can we make it a lasting and positive and loving relationship. Okay. This is a wonderful slide for you to take a look at. And what this is demonstrating is how strong our biological need actually is for other people. So just because we are so in tune to and find it so important to have our emotional needs met, we cannot deny that there are physical needs that are also being met through getting our need for love and belonging fulfilled. We cannot ignore our biological need just because there are also important emotional needs that many of us actually are more concerned with, right? But when you take a look at here, and again, this is some of the things that Harry Harlow demonstrated, when you take a look at this chart that I have here, you can see that physical touch meant better physical outcomes. When we study in positive psychology and in health psychology, physical outcomes, what we're looking at is we're looking at changes in cortisol level, changes in stress level, changes in heart rate, damage to heart, right? And damage to other systems because we don't have the mental capacities that we need to have on board in order for us to stay healthy. So we cannot ignore the biological outcomes. Those are healthy outcomes for becoming healthier in our minds and becoming healthier in our relationships. We also want to become healthier in our bodies too, and none of those things are separate, as we've said. Now, what this is this is a happiness scale. It says it's a satisfaction with life scale, but this is actually a happiness scale. And you might want to think about actually seeing what your score is on this happiness scale. It's only 5 questions, and those 5 questions you can see are pretty easy. You answer them on a scale of 1 to 7, with 1 being not at all true of me and 7 being absolutely true of you, right? And only 5 questions that you have there, and then you can see the scoring there on the bottom. I bring this up for a couple reasons. It's just a simple measure of happiness. A lot of people think that our measures have to be so intricate because I need to fool you into not actually knowing what I'm trying to measure. But that's not true. I don't have to fool you into not knowing. I can ask anyone. Used to be that we used to kind of do this sort of backhanded way of taking a look at happiness in the past. So we used to take a look at whether or not you owned a home, whether or not you lived in one of the desirable cities. Do you have things like services, city services, libraries, good schools, those kinds of things? Do you make a lot of money? That equated in these surveys according to happiness. Do you have good health? Those are objective measures of happiness, right? I can go and look at reports to see if you've been in the hospital, to see how sick you've been, see how many sick days you missed from work. Tells me something about your mental health, right? So when we're taking a look at these, then it is actually your subjective opinion on happiness that is more important than those objective measures. What we find is that those objective measures are not highly correlated with actual feelings of happiness. Now, this makes sense, of course, doesn't it? Because I could have all kinds of things in this world: a big house, married, kids, a nice car, but that doesn't necessarily make me happy, right? So we want to take a look at actually not just objective measures in science. Sometimes we want to look at subjective measures, opinions that you have, because the opinion of how happy you are is more important than my opinion of how happy you should be. All right, now again, this isn't exactly love, but they give us some ideas for some good measures that we want to take a look at. Okay. Now, let's take a look at some questions that you might be interested in the answers to that leads us to some information about love and relationships. So, true or false? Women are happier than men. True or false? What do you think? Well, let's see. What does the data show us? The data shows us that is false. This is an interesting question, and it's an interesting answer, because some people might say something like, well, women are less happy than men because women get depressed more often than men get depressed. Well, that is true. Okay. But what we actually found is that yes, women are more depressed, but this is what is interesting about our measures and why measures are so important. Because if I ask men about depression, men are not as depressed as women are. However, if I take a measure of things that are external behaviors, depression is an internal feeling. But if I take a look at external behaviors like aggression and violence and suicide, another external behavior, right? I can see the behavior, and that behavior indicates not so happy. So what do we find out is that when we have a measure of external behaviors, men end up reporting the same amount of happiness as when we have internal measures of how we feel, like depressed or unhappy. Okay? All right, let's move on. True or false? Married people are happier than single people. Now, this is really interesting because we've been studying this question for a long time, and actually I've just looked up the data for this presentation. We actually have about the same statistics for this. Married people are happier than single people. True or false? and we find out that that is true. Okay, so what we see here is self-reported health measures as they relate to satisfaction in marriage. And so this is beginning to indicate that what we need is we need resources. Why is it that people who are married are happier than people who are not married? In part, it is because married people, we know from the statistics, have more resources. And those resources then help individuals be able to get better health care. We know that one of the things that leaves people the least happy is when they are sickly. The next one shows marital status. You can see individuals who are divorced are less happy. Individuals who are single are also below the average satisfaction with life. Same thing with widowed, and same thing with separated. This statistic has also been pretty stable across time, where individuals who are separated are the least happy. Individuals who are married or a civil partnership, we're seeing that they are average level of happiness, but that is above average levels of happiness for other marital statuses. Okay, now we can see also that economic activity also leads to greater levels of happiness. That we have to have a certain level of economic security in order for us to be happy. You can see individuals who are retired are very happy there. Then the breakdown here becomes age. Who's happiest according to age levels here? And we can see that individuals actually who are older have higher levels of happiness. And this in part has to do with a change in priorities, where older people prioritize close relationships and younger people prioritize things. In particular, they prioritize things that have to do with their career and money making. So we can begin to see the outcomes of relationships on our lives and satisfaction compared to when we are younger and have a focus on more external things. Okay. Now, this is the second statistic on marital satisfaction that I wanted to show you. And when you take a look at these, what you're looking at are differences between happiness and unhappiness. And then very specifically, here's happiness versus unhappiness on the bottom. And then very specifically, women versus everybody, right? Because there is some controversy about whether or not women have a tendency to be less happy when they are married, because they have a lot of work that they do, especially with rearing the children. There have been a lot of studies that have been done to demonstrate that the hardship of parenting may reduce happiness levels considerably. Now, from the research that I've read, that actually is not true. We're not seeing that. First of all, women are less happy than men when they are married, and we are also not seeing that individuals with children are less happy than those who don't. So let's take a look at some of these figures here. All right, so we've got the figures here now of happiness, right? So we said this is happiness for all adults. And we see here then that we've got a higher percentage of individuals who are happy when they're married compared to when they are separated or divorced, and compared to never being married at all. Let's take a look at unhappiness then for all adults. Unhappiness for those who are married is significantly less than those who are separated or divorced, and those who have never been married. And then they also divide them up between no kids and a parent. Same thing here. So blue is no kids, yellow they are parents. We can see that there's a significant strain then on individuals who are parents, but they are separated or divorced. Let's take a look at now. These are the statistics for women, and we are seeing that there is not really a whole lot of difference between women here and the entire age group in their feelings of happiness because of marital status, right? So happiness based on marital status, married compared to separated or divorced, and again we've got no kids and is a parent, and then never been married. And then the same thing here with unhappiness. This is unhappiness. So those individuals who are married, and these are women now, we can see then again that they pretty much match the same statistics as all adults. So we see that women are not significantly less happy just because they're in families, for example, right? Or just because they have a lot more work to do. Now, we're going to take a look at that a little bit more closely as well, because that's a very interesting question about the differences that women have, or gender differences, in our satisfaction. Okay? All right, so let's move on. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about some strategies that we might use or think about in order to gain better perspectives in our relationships. First of all, I know that we're talking more about happiness, but what we can see is that it is related to, first of all, our relationships. It's a measure that we've been using for our relationships, more than measures of love. There are measures of love, but the measures of love really have to do with a lot of overlapping between feelings and not necessarily successful loves that bring about happiness. And so that's the reason why we're focusing now a little bit more, turn the focus on happiness, because it doesn't matter whether or not you're in love. What matters is whether or not you have healthy, loving relationships. That's what we want to take a look at. All right, and so now let's take a look at, can happiness be taught? What are the strategies that we need to use in order to develop better relationships, better feelings inside, so that we are better adjusted for better relationships? Okay? Now, what this is called the hedonic treadmill. This hedonic treadmill is an important concept to know. And this hedonic treadmill says that we actually cannot work to change our levels of happiness. And what we know is actually there were studies that demonstrated this is true. So what is it? We see something, we want that something, we buy that something makes us happy, and then we easily adapt to that something, which means that doesn't make us so happy anymore. And this happens all the time. Now, what are ways we can get off that hedonic treadmill? Again, I see something, I want it, I buy it. That actually can mean a loving relationship, right? I see somebody I want, I get with that person, it makes me happy for a moment, and now no longer makes me happy, right? That's the hedonic treadmill. The strategies that I'm trying to focus on help get you off of this hedonic treadmill so that you can learn to appreciate the relationships that you have instead of simply adapting to them and getting used to them. What does that mean, that we adapt to relationships? Well, here's one easy way that we adapt to relationships. That is, we lose the emotional impact that relationship has over time. Think about the day that you, for example, may have gotten married, right? That day, even if you've never gotten married, you can see that that day would be a spectacular day, an exciting day, right? And the love that you had that led up to that wedding day was very exciting for you. But we're not cheering and saying, yes, I'm in love, right? 5 years down the road, and woohoo, I'm still in love, right? 10 years down the road. We don't have the same feeling that we had the day that we got married. Those feelings decrease. That's one way that we adapt. That's how we get on the hedonic treadmill. Another way that we get on the hedonic treadmill and that we adapt to great feelings is we contrast that event to other events. And this on social media is a really great example of how this can work, right? I had a happy event in my life, but I contrast it to other people's lives and other people's happiness. And what ends up happening is I have a lower level of experience of that happiness. It's no longer self-contained. My little gift, no. Now my gift is tainted by other people's bigger, better gifts. So the adaptation that occurs is a lowering of the feeling, the intensity of the feeling, the strength of the feeling that you had. It's a lowering of that, which means that I adapt back to my level of happiness or love before the event. So, one strategy is to know this, to know that comparing ourselves to other people gets us to adapt to that great feeling we had very readily, right? And if we're aware that we lose feelings over time, maybe what we'll do is we'll try and do things to stimulate those feelings so that they don't die out, all right? This is why some of this information that we have and research that we have on happiness is so important to understand when we're trying to contribute to good feelings that we have in loving relationships. Okay, we talked a little bit about what are implicit theories of love. And in these implicit theories of love, we talked about romantic love, romantic destination that we had, and we talked about relationship growth. So in this slide, remember, I just want to remind you that are you a person who implicitly believes that you have a soulmate because it's going to change the way that you work on the relationship, okay? Are you a person that believes that you have a soulmate, or are you a person that believes that you have to work on your relationships? But let's take a closer look at this slide, shall we? Because this slide is a little interesting here. What does it say? It says here that when I idealize my love for a person, that actually at time 2 increases my chances of still being in love. Okay. And so what we're saying is don't get on that hedonic treadmill where you no longer idealize the other person. If you no longer idealize the other person, it affects your longevity is what it affects. When individuals at time 1 see each other relatively realistically, we tend to be less in love later on or break up later on. So we want to idealize each other. I want to pop a question in here for you. Okay. All right. So here, true or false, people generally report average levels of happiness. So when we give you a scale of 1 to 10 and we ask you, how happy are you? What I'm asking you is do people generally answer 5? What do you think? I'll give you a second to think about it. So do people report 5s on scales of 1 to 10? And what we find is that's false. That people generally report above average levels of happiness. We call this a positivity bias. You can see here that I can give this even to young children. Ask them, young children, circle how happy you are. Which face tells me the best how happy you are? And we can see that the majority of individuals, 93% of individuals, rate themselves as above average in happiness. This is really an important statistic because, like I said, what this is called in psychology is a positivity bias. And this positivity bias is what motivates us. If I were just averagely happy about everything and every relationship that I had, I could be just as motivated to get out of that relationship as I am to stay in that relationship, right? If I knew that this career made me happier than another career, then that motivates me to get into the career that makes me most happy. And so when we take a look at this above average scoring on happiness that we see, what we call that is a positivity bias, which drives us in the direction of making us happy. Now, let's take a look at just how happy are we. And I'm just going to put this up there for just a second, but it generally shows you the positivity bias that shows, again, approximately 83%, I believe, is the percentage of individuals here who are above average in happiness, well above average in happiness. Here we see optimistic views of our future as well. All right. Now, this slide here also gives us some more strategies to take a look at. And in what this slide, though, takes a look at are strategies that are less complex relative to love and more that has to do with just black and white choices I can make in my life that can contribute to long-term successful marriages. All right, so we can see here that these are percentages is what they are. And so what they tell us is the percent of decrease in the risk of divorce when we have this, right? So as in this first case, income goes up, the risk of divorce goes down by 30%. That's what the negative correlation is there for you. It's telling us that the risk goes down and that 3 is more than the 24, right? Which is also more than the 14. So we know that income has a significant impact on the risk of divorce. Here we have the second one, having a baby 7 months or more after marriage versus before marriage. So we can see that that contributes as well to decreases in divorce. If I wait to have children for at least 7 months, that decreases my risk of divorce by 24%. Marrying over 25 versus under 18 also decreases the risk of divorce considerably. The same amount as having a baby later in our marriage than earlier or before marriage. Our own family of origin is intact. So this is saying the contribution then that divorced parents have to whether or not I'm likely to get divorced. Divorced parents increased chance of being divorced by 14%. Religious affiliation versus no religious affiliation, that impacts the risk of divorce about the same amount that family of origin does, divorced or not divorced parents. And then we can also see some college versus a high school dropout. That actually was the second most significant impact, decreasing divorce by 25% if you have some college education. So that gives us some really good information about some strategies that we might think about prior to getting in a relationship. Now what I want to talk to you about is this 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And what this is ways that we can either destroy our relationships over time, or we can find ways to cope with our relationships in healthier ways. So the 4 strategies that are on the left, criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling, are strategies that will cause the demise of your relationship. This is a theory, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, according to John Gottman. And if you know anything about marriage and family, John Gottman is a very big name in marriage and family. Has done a lot of research on these areas in particular. And this is Gottman's summary that he has for, again, those things that destroy a marriage. And then the elements that are on the right-hand side are elements that I can do in each one of those cases to help save my marriage. All right? And also these strategies are listed in order of strength or increase in chances that they will contribute to the demise of your relationship. So criticism is the first behavior that individuals engage in that shows or can exhibit possible divorce in the future. And then after, if couples do not overcome this criticism, criticizing one another, what they end up doing then is going on to the next stage, according to Gottman, basically, and that is adding contempt to their relationship. Okay, so let's take a look at these a little bit more closely. So first of all, criticism is the first characteristic of a marriage that is heading for divorce. And what is criticism compared to complaining? Who wants somebody complaining in their relationship? Remember, this is Gottman's theory, so let's take a closer look at it, okay? Criticizing an individual is when an individual characterizes a person in stable traits, okay? All right, so criticism is when you characterize your mate using stable traits and stable negative traits, in particular when something bad happens. Let's take a closer look at this chart that I have down here for you, okay? According to this chart, we have relationship enhancing behaviors and distress maintaining behaviors. Relationship enhancing behaviors are equated to happy marriages. Distress maintaining behaviors are correlated with unhappy relationships. So what does this mean? And what does this have to do with criticism? Well, when something positive happens in a relationship, and I say that that is an internal characteristic, what I'm saying is that characteristic is part of my spouse's personality, as opposed to external characteristic that it is due to something in the environment. Okay, so let's take a look at a positive behavior. All right, so a positive behavior that an individual might do is they might buy you flowers. All right, positive behavior. Somebody buys you flowers. And so if you are in a happy relationship, what you say is that individual did that because they are kind. It is due to their personality, an internal trait. And if that individual does something negative, like forgets to buy flowers on your birthday, what you do is you attribute that to something in the environment, something external. Remember, this is for happy relationships, okay? So I would say, the reason that you forgot to buy me flowers on my birthday is because you were very busy at work, or because we had an emergency in the family, and you usually would not forget to do that. All right, those behaviors lead to happy relationship enhancing behaviors. What Gottman is talking about is distressing behaviors. Distressing behaviors lead to unhappy relationships, so that when somebody does something positive, this is when we begin to end up in relationships that are criticizing one another. And criticism occurs when we take a positive behavior like buying flowers, and we turn that then into a reason for it was due to something external, because your friend bought his wife flowers and you felt like a jerk if you didn't buy flowers for me, right? Okay, so when an individual does something positive in an unhappy relationship, in a distress maintaining relationship, what an individual then does is characterizes it as a part of the environment. It's not due to you. You're not a nice person. It is due to something in the environment. And then the last one there is for unhappy distress maintaining relationships, individuals, when they do something negative, that's due to something internal. So when you forgot flowers, it's because you are inconsiderate, an internal personality characteristic. So what this is saying is that if I do not want to criticize my significant other, then what I need to do is attribute good behaviors to their personality, and bad behaviors, this is complaining about bad behaviors, to something in the environment. And that makes a behavior easier to change. I'm not saying it's unchangeable. When I call somebody lazy, or when I say that you are unkind or forgetful, right, or selfish, those are things that are difficult to change. When I focus on the behavior, Gottman would say that's complaining. That's something that individuals can change. And in our ability to change these things then means that we can work with one another, right? If I frame your bad behavior as changeable behavior, then that means you and I can work with one another. Okay, the second element or variable to the downfall of a marriage would be contempt. And this is when you begin to see truly hateful feelings towards one another. What does Gottman suggest that you do? Remember, what you hopefully did was you got married to that person because there were qualities in that person that you felt were good qualities. And so what you try and do is you try and demonstrate appreciation for those qualities. Let's say, for example, that you are married to somebody who's impulsive, right? They're impulsive and they do things without thinking. How could you turn that trait into something positive? If you suggested that that trait was spontaneity, that my spouse, my significant other is spontaneous, not impulsive, but spontaneous, I can frame that in a way that demonstrates a greater appreciation for that individual, for my significant other. So that's number 2. Number 3 that we end up going into then when we do not correct these problems earlier in our relationships is defensiveness. And what defensiveness is an inability to take responsibility for anything, right? Anytime somebody brings up the fact that you didn't, you forgot, right? I wish you would begin to say things like, well, blaming, for example, you do the same thing, okay? Or excusing the behavior, rationalizing the behavior. If you didn't make me mad, I would not have behaved that way, okay? All right, so defensiveness then turns into, how do we take defensive behaviors and turn them into something positive for my marriage? You take responsibility. Nobody's asking you to take responsibility for things that you're not supposed to take responsibility for. But as an adult, we should be able to take responsibility for those things we're responsible for and put aside those things that we're not responsible for. And that's not, we don't put those things aside in a defensive way. Somebody might suggest we are responsible for those things, and we have to consider that, right? Okay, and then the last one there is stonewalling. And stonewalling actually is when just teetering on the edge of divorce, when an individual is stonewalling, that's when they're not talking to one another. So if you have a spouse who's stonewalling you or a significant other who's stonewalling you, the best thing that you can do is self-soothing. And self-soothing is making sure that you find time for yourself, that you do things for yourself, that you meet up with friends so that you can communicate with somebody on an adult level. Those are things that help soothe you when somebody's not talking to you, when they cut off communication with you, when they ghosted you, right? What do? You self-soothe is what you do. All right, let's move on. Let's look at these charts here that show satisfaction with marriage over time. Again, what we're trying to do is give you some information so that we don't see you fall into this pit of the hedonic treadmill where you don't know how to get your marriage back on track. All right, so what do we see here? Well, the very first thing here is we see that husbands and wives have less satisfaction in their marriage as years go on. Now, this, of course, shouldn't surprise anybody, right? That's really no surprise that people are less satisfied with their marriage as time goes on. One of the interesting things to take a look at in that chart that makes things a little bit kind of more interesting is that over time, there's a switch in the satisfaction between men and women in their marriages. And earlier on, it appears that women are more satisfied and want to be married more than men do. But later on in the marriage, the men become much more dependent on the relationship than the women do. And that satisfaction with the marriage actually switches so that over time, men are more satisfied than women are with the marriages. That's an important statistic to pay attention to. Why are women changing their satisfaction with marriage over time, and why are men increasing it, right? Logically speaking, what I have seen, relationships that I've seen and different counseling that I've been in, is that women are telling men early on what they need in the relationship, and men aren't listening. And later on, when women are getting fed up with the relationship, we see that men then are beginning to become more desperate in trying to keep that relationship alive. Next week, when we come and we talk about whether or not we need to have self-love, we're going to talk a little bit more about how men love differently than women do in relationships. It's really interesting to see. Let's take a close look at those other two charts now too, okay? All right, so what this chart here is duration of the relationship as it relates to passion. And so what we're seeing is that as our relationships increase in longevity, passion decreases. Now, this is another thing that's just not a surprise, but it goes to show you that early statistics really focused on some of these external types of exhibits or behaviors related to love, as opposed to internal, like level of intimacy. When we ask questions about level of intimacy, intimacy levels are the things that increase over time. This is really good information, because if you are interested in simply a sexual relationship over time, you can see that satisfaction is going to decrease very readily. But if you're more interested in intimacy and what that relationship is really doing for you, then that increases over time. And isn't that a wonderful statistic, right? Okay, moving on. True or false, money can buy happiness? Now, of course, this is kind of an easy question for us, right? It's almost a no-brainer. We all know that money can't buy happiness. But let's take a look at what the statistics actually say. Of course, that answer to that is false. However, what we do is we take a look at the increases in happiness relative to the increases in income. And as we can see, that when individuals have an income level that is closer to the poverty rate, then we do have concerns about, or relationships, greater relationships between income and happiness. However, as income rises, as long as I don't have to worry about being in poverty, as long as I don't have to worry about paying my bills, then happiness does not increase respectively with income, right? I can continue to make more money, and this does not increase my levels of happiness. This is called the paradox of affluence. The paradox of affluence. Let's move on. What makes us most happy? Now, this gets into love. This is how we're getting into love a little bit more. All right, so what makes us most happy? God, marriage, and spouses. C, children or grandchildren. D, money. E, success. What do you think makes us most happy? God, marriage, spouse, children, grandchildren, money, or success? And then I'm going to ask you this question before I give you the answer to the last one. Of the following, what do people do most often to improve their mood? A, listen to music. B, pray or meditate. C, talk to friends and or family. D, eat. Or E, go out with friends. What do we do most often to improve our mood? Okay, and then this is a chart also from an article that's called The New Science of Happiness. And what do we see here? What we see here is that our relationships, in particular with our children, is what makes us most happy. So now we can see why women do not decrease their levels of happiness when they have children, because our relationship with our children is most important. Our relationship with our friends and our family are second most important, and contributing to the lives of others. All of those things, all of those three things are within 1 to 2 percentage points of one another. You can see here then to the right, what do we do most often to improve our mood? And once again, we see talking to family and friends to improve our mood. Take a look at that, because it's kind of interesting there when we take a look at gender differences between men and women, right? Also remember, when we're talking about science, that much of the scientific information that we pick up from are mostly from college students. And so that obviously, as we said, changes as we get older. Can we have flourishing relationships? That means, can we have loving relationships? And what we see here is as the importance of these two things, love and money, change, so does our satisfaction in life. So that when we place more importance on something like love, we have greater levels of satisfaction. When we place more importance on money, we have lesser feelings of satisfaction. All right? Okay. All right, so what is the paradox of affluence? And the paradox of affluence has answered the question, what would improve the quality of your life? And so individuals asked this and started asking this in the 1970s, and they also continue talking about this over time so that we can kind of look at what it is exactly that would improve our lives. What do we feel would improve our lives? And what we found out was that people basically said money. People making $30,000 said that they would be better off if they were making $50,000. Individuals who are making $50,000 said if they made $100,000, their lives would be better off. And people making $100,000 said they would be better off if they made $250,000. When individuals were asked what would improve their lives, they most often said that it was actually money that would improve their lives. Okay, and so why have we not seen significant increases in happiness despite the fact that we've seen these significant increases in money? And that is the paradox of affluence. And so what we've been talking about really a lot is what is love? Well, love doesn't come when we focus on external factors. It comes when we focus on internal factors. And this leads to what Schwartz called the tyranny of choice. This tyranny of choice. And I put this in there because it has a lot to do with our levels of happiness, and it has a lot to do with getting on the hedonic treadmill and whether or not we're investing in the right types of relationships. Maximizers are individuals who, when they go to buy something, they look at all of the possibilities for those features, right? So if you were going to buy a television, a maximizer would look at every possible price, every possible manufacturer, and all of the features in order to make the best possible choice. That's a maximizer. A satisficer is a person who aims to buy the product and just get something that's good enough. What we find is that maximizers end up being less satisfied. The higher the maximizer, the less satisfied they are with their purchase. And the reason why is because of what they call opportunity costs. What are opportunity costs? It's the cost of looking at every single option. Let me give you another example. Let's say that you are trying to decide to take a trip this summer, okay? And so you are deciding between a trip to Alaska, you're deciding between a trip to Europe, and you're deciding to take a trip to the Bahamas, okay? And you know that Alaska has great beauty, but it's cold. The Bahamas are really warm, and you like vacations that are really warm. But if I went to Europe, I would get a lot of culture. I wouldn't be enjoying the sunshine, but a lot of culture and a lot of beautiful things to see. When you decide on which one that you want to take, because you've put all of those vacation opportunities side by side in comparison, it becomes very tangible for you to know what you're actually missing. Right. You understand, I'm missing the beauty of Alaska when I go and lay on the beach, right? And also I'm missing the culture. So, I'm getting a great tan and I love to be warm. Right? What we want to do is, with our things that are making us happy, we want to try and aim for what is good enough so we aren't spending so much time focusing on those things that we don't have. Opportunity costs. Okay, that's it for today. I always say that I'm going to end up my session with a question, and my question is for LinkedIn. And LinkedIn, I want to know what happened to the crisis in science. I think that it is actually YouTube that maybe has taken the crisis of science off. Again, that was by Corbett, Corbett report. Okay. And so I'm looking to find out why that was taken off. Because I thought that it had some really good information, in particular about questioning some of the validity of some of the studies and taking a look at how some scientists are fabricating data. And in fabricating this data, what they're doing is they are increasing the suspicion that we have of scientists. Don't forget that I am a scientist, and as a scientist, I want to make sure that we are reporting information like we should report information. And so make sure that you are emailing me if you have any questions. So that's the best way. I'm going to start posting today's questions up there. And make sure that you visit my website, www.healthymindbodyspirit.net. That is actually where you can get to today's question underneath the About button. Also remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel. My YouTube channel you can find me, Dr. Annette Feravich is all that you have to do is search for. I will pop right up, right, so that you will always know when there's a new video coming out. It's really helpful when you hit that subscribe button. But you also will be able to find out when I'm actually on live as well and watch me live. That's all that I have for you today. Thank you for those individuals I saw that have joined me. I appreciate it. And episode 5, are we supposed to love ourselves first? So I hope that you join me Sundays at 4 p.m. I know it's live, and when I go live, I run a little bit longer. I will be getting these audio on a podcast, so you only have to listen to them. But don't forget that you actually do miss some of the pictures that I have up there, and they really can, basically, they're worth 1,000 words at times. So don't forget to join me for episode 5. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at, are we supposed to love ourselves first? Can we love other people if we don't love ourselves first? All right. That's it. Thank you for joining me.